The death of God is about the drying up of a horizon of meaning and of a whole form of human life.
Where do we stand in the illusion it makes? What kind of space are we invited into?
The material relations between people become social relations between things. When we look at toasters, corn, and TVs, we don't
We
see
still, to a large extent, live in the interregnum between worlds, if you will, or between paradigms. Not many people in the history of the world have faced that.
Diet Soap is a Sublation Media podcast. All right, welcome to the Diet Soap podcast, but it is also the Untrodden podcast. With me is Dylan from the Untrodden podcast. He reached out to me. He's a friend of Rudy's, and he said he wanted to have a conversation and maybe push back on my framing and some of the claims I've been making on Diet Soap and elsewhere. And I'm always open to camaraderie conversations and critiques, and I'm glad that there's a new face to the left on Lain, and Dylan's amongst the up and coming. Are you a Zoomer, Dylan? How old are you?
I believe technically, yeah. I'm 21, so yeah, I think so. Unfortunately.
All right. Oh my gosh. Okay. So Dylan, yeah. Welcome to the world. And I'm glad to get a chance to talk to you. So yeah, I'm going to let you lead, Dylan. What's on your mind?
Yeah, well, first I just wanted to say, just like in general, I really appreciate you having this conversation. Like, this could go a lot of different directions. It could be more hostile. We'll see. But I just wanted to make a note that, like, there's definitely like a really oppressive atmosphere, kind of like in the entire world, but especially like the online politics area, where everyone kind of wants to preach in their own sphere, and like they're just not open to discussions. And I'm sure you've noticed that too. And in general, I do feel like you're more open to conversation, and obviously you're proving that here. So I do really appreciate that. No matter how it goes, I just want to I think it's a really big deal that we're willing to have the conversation.
Yeah, and listen, I'm not I'm expecting to learn things from you. I'm not at all closed off to being corrected. So I don't want to be adversarial, especially, you know, on the front half of this, when we're not debating what I consider to be the facts.
Right, for sure.
So yeah, what's on your mind?
Yeah, so I'm thinking about like how to characterize this. So I think you've been talking to, it's kind of a consistent theme on your show to talk about some of these issues. And generally when you talk to people, whether it's like Ben Studebaker, or Chris sometimes, Chris Catrone, or some other people, they're going to approach it differently than I would. So they might say things like, it's not worth tactically to focus on this, or theoretically, like, this is not really the crucial issue, so we need to redirect our focus. And I think that's a genuine impulse of theirs. I don't think they're like being evasive, but what's kind of going like unspoken about, like under the, you know, under all of that, is like whether or not there's a mistake to be made in the first place by even believing some of these things, right? And that would be more where I come from. And so I just feel like a lot of people are kind of probably frustrated about that. I mean, that's where a lot of like the kind of myth about you comes from. Obviously, a lot of people on the left dismiss you, and they're like, you're just like a right wing, whatever. And so that's kind of where that comes from. And so I feel like there's value in talking about it more directly, like just actually talking directly about that issue itself, rather than kind of like going around it. And again, like, not to accuse them of like avoiding the key issue. I think they have reasons for focusing where they do, but I also think we should, like, you know, be really honest about like what's going on, like what is the real issue, which is like, you know, siding with Trump, I guess, in like kind of a vulgar sense. Because for me,
okay, can I just address that? Yeah, I mean, so just to say, I do think there's a difference between what Studebaker says about these issues and what Catrone says about these issues, but I would say in both cases, when I've talked to both Benjamin Studebaker and Chris Catrone, I've tried to make it clear that the point of raising these issues is not to raise an issue that I think would be good for socialist organizing of the working class, particularly. I don't think that it's bad for that. I just don't think that it's why people on the left should be interested in these issues. For instance, around Russiagate, or the Twitter files or the JFK assassination, which, by the way, for the longest time was very much a left-wing obsession, not a right-wing one. And yeah, and so the reason why I particularly target those issues or COVID is because for me it exposes the way in which what calls itself the left has been ideologically captured when they are not able to address or pay attention or be serious about those concerns. That but so the that is my concern. Is not that I want to help or hurt Donald Trump. It's that I want the left to break from this popular front strategy of aligning with the Democratic Party, including the most supposedly progressive or radical parts of the Democratic Party.
Right.
That's where I'm at. And when I hear that people think that I'm right wing, to me, I feel like, well, that just exposes the degree to which people on the left are ideologically captured, because I'm not at all right wing.
Right. Yeah, I think the reason I brought them up is because they're not really engaging with that like direct point, because I've heard you say a lot of times that there's value in kind of uncovering the truth of these things and just generally uncovering like this truth. Just truth is a value in and of itself, and kind of critiquing the state with that kind of clear-eyed truth-seeking impulse, which in this case tactically aligns with the right wing, but obviously you wouldn't think you're just blindly aligning with them at all. So that's kind of like, that's why I wanted to unpack like what exactly is that impulse, like is that, because I actually agree with you. Like I'm not really interested in, this is why I think it'd be a different kind of conversation. I'm not interested in saying this isn't like the correct tactical approach for organizing the working class, because I'm not even fully on the left. Like I'm more of a liberal with a lot of socialist interests, and like I'm engaging with the left, and I agree with the left on a lot of things and ways of thinking about things. But but I want to like have the conversation on that level, because I do agree with you that like the truth of these things is important. I just feel like we come to different conclusions, and so I'm wondering, how that's possible. If we're at the meta level, like how is it possible that I don't think either of us want to align with a party blindly. Even though I am more of a liberal Democrat, I still don't like the Democratic Party. Like there's no reason to. I mean, they're just a political party. They have, they're dishonest when they need to be. They're very stupid often, just because they're just, I don't know, they just are. And I don't like misrepresentations or like flawed thinking. I don't like those things. So I don't want to be like, oh, I think we should just align with the Democrats, even though I'm more of a Democrat than most people on the left. I still don't want to do that. So I really align with you there. I just feel like there has to be like a breakdown happening when, when you and I assess all these different situations, we're just having like such completely different conclusions. And so that's what I thought was like worth like working through a bit more.
Okay, well, look, I'm not trying to be patronizing here, but I'm going to tell you a story about my youth, like when and how I thought when I was your age. And I know it's so annoying when older people do that kind of thing,
Right.
but I do think it's illustrative, because when I was 21, the full horizon of my political understanding spanned from the far left of the Democratic Party to Ronald Reagan and the right wing, right? And I saw, and I was very concerned about a variety of topics and issues, right? So I was really worried about nuclear war and wanting to have a nuclear freeze. I was against wars in general. I had some concerns about protecting and expanding the welfare state and protecting people who were poor. I didn't think very well about class politics, but I was beginning to be interested by the time I was 21 in trying to understand class politics, mostly through an anarchist perspective. And I would have claimed that I was for democracy. I don't think I would have wanted to claim that I was a liberal, because liberal meant compromised. It meant like these are the people that you can't trust. They're gonna betray you. These liberals. But the institutions I liked and felt confident in the most were institutions like the ACLU. Because I was even then very concerned about free speech as an issue, and it wasn't unique to me. It was pretty much anyone who called himself a Democrat who would have been for free speech in an age when the Christian right and Ronald Reagan were considered to be the censors and the ones who were stamping on individuals' rights and the rights of artists to express themselves. So I relate to your position of saying, look, I just want to be a liberal Democrat and I don't want to be aligned too much with the Democratic Party, but I want to stick to these principles, right? So what I'll say is that since then, now at the age of 54, having read more, experienced more politically, having ended up being a kind of Marxist professionally, I am no longer that committed to democracy as we understand it. And I'm more committed to liberalism than I had been before. Liberalism meaning the rights of individuals and protecting the rights of free association and the rights of people in society, the working class in particular, as against the state. So, and that means in today's context, and really since Reagan on, those concerns about protecting individual liberty against the state has always been, and there's been an uneasy stance on the left towards that. It kind of opportunistically will be for it when it's in our interest, and will be against it when it's not. So I do think that the difference between you and I might be on the level of what our politics actually are. Just to begin there, because it does matter that the horizon of my politics is to actually, I want to set up a path where workers can go beyond the conceptions of politics as we have now, based on state power and democracy, democratic control over the state, and that kind of thing.
Right. Yeah, I'm not so sure about that actually. I think, and this is my a more like aggressive comment, but I think right now you're closer to how you were when you were 21 than I am. And the reason I would say that is because I think when you draw, what I really want to caution against is kind of this dichotomy between like the state and like democracy versus like civil rights and liberalism, because I think what I would want to maintain is a more historically developed and concentrated liberal tradition, right? So when I say I'm a liberal, I mean the state, but a democratically restrained state. I mean civil liberties, but civil liberties that can actually be protected and are like substantial, and they're not just kind of like libertarian talking points, like like when the guy's like, I don't want to wear my seatbelt. Like I think we need I think substantial rights are something different than that, right? But they are similar to that. They're not disconnected from that impulse, right? So I think there's this very complex liberal tradition, and I guess kind of my issue is like, and this is an issue with Chris also, but just to bring it up, and I think you would agree with him on this, that what you want to do is point out Trump as an illustration of what the system really is, and point out how Trump is engaging with and against that system. And sometimes it comes off as if you're like on his side, which I know you don't want to agree with that, but what I would prefer to do, and what I think is really valuable, just to put it out there, the reason why I'm so sympathetic to the Marxist left right now is because after the election, I read the 18th Brumaire, and I was like, this is an actual like critique I have to answer to. Like as a liberal who just believes in the system, I have to figure out why this book is making a very biting critique against liberal democracy. And under that paradigm, Trump would actually be the best argument for Marxism, in that Trump is kind of showing how the liberal state necessarily, perhaps from a Marxist framework, falls into this Bonapartist, apparatus. It is this Bonapartist apparatus, and then Trump is kind of the contradiction exposing itself to us. And so that's kind of the best argument for Marxism, is that, hey, like liberal, you think your system is so stable and like peaceful, and then look at what's happening. Like this is not stability, this is nonsense. And that's actually kind of an anti-Trump point, but I don't think it should stay in a naive anti-Trump, like Trump is bad. I think if you're going to take that critique, it would have to go in a substantial Marxist direction. If you're fully bought into that, I guess it doesn't have to, but it would be something like that. And so I'm very sympathetic to that, but it doesn't seem like that's what you're doing. Like you're doing something else where you feel like the right wing and the way that they stand up for, the rights that you're talking about, that needs to be stood for. So rather than using Trump as a critique, as like a weapon to show the flaws in liberal democracy, you're actually saying that Trump is standing for the true, less degraded form of liberal democracy in the first place.
Yeah, this is interesting. In a video I put out before the election, when I was talking to David Shields, I made the point that what we're seeing is the end of neoliberalism, which is a kind of Bonapartist state that manages society through both, nation states and so-called civil society, nonprofit kind of organizations, by regulating the market and regulating and propping up capital. We had this, it tried to ameliorate, mediate, manage a crisis in capitalism that is constantly recurring, and so that it had the same basic crisis within capitalism, from my perspective, set up the Fordist welfare state, and then it was transformed through another crisis into neoliberal administration. And now with Trump, we're seeing a change from neoliberalism into, it's being called a variety of things. Trumpism is one way it's being put, but it used to be called Reaganism or Clintonism. That's what neoliberalism was called. I would say what we're seeing is some sort of hybrid of neoliberalism and a kind of return to national sovereignty as a more of a mediating force in society, or at least an attempt to. But what I claimed was that as the neoliberal order ends, some of the presuppositions of both neoliberalism and the Fordist period are being put into question, because basically since the 50s, there's been this notion that we're in a post-ideological, post-class, post-Marxist moment, and that this transformation of neoliberalism into whatever's going to come next exposes the unreality of that claim. It exposes the way in which that has been both something that people were upset about and that they were critical of, this post-ideological character of society, and they were demanding it at the same time, people like Daniel Bell and others. So for me, Trump represents both a critique of neoliberalism, exposing the contradictions within the longstanding Bonapartist administrative state, and the return of class politics, but a return of class politics that on its own will only lead to the reconstitution of the same dynamic that we're seeing end. In a way, it will just be another phase of that. But I do think it, for socialists on the left, we should see Trump as a challenge and a symptom of our own failure. The fact that Trump stands up for supposedly working class power right now should be taken seriously, not because he is going to be adequate to the task at all. He won't be, but because in reality, most of the left is no better at representing working class power, and is even more conservative than Trump. So I also don't think it's fair to think of Trump as more. I think it's fair to think of him as a conservative. I don't think it's fair to think of him as a reactionary in a way that is more extreme than other capitalist politicians in both parties. Like he's not more reactionary than Marco Rubio. He's not more reactionary than Joe Biden. He's not more reactionary than Kamala Harris or Angela Merkel, or his rhetoric and affect is wholly different and at times inappropriate. But I don't think his politics are more deeply reactionary than anyone else's at this moment, which might make it sound like I'm a Trump apologist. Only if you listen to me talk about everyone else, I don't like any of them. So.
Yeah, I don't think it's about him being reactionary, though. I don't think that's the question. The thing about Trump is that I think he really is a Louis Bonaparte type figure, where he isn't anything. He truly will embrace anything for his own whims, his ego. He's very stupid. Like he truly is deeply stupid. And I think that's like kind of the point, is like, how is this guy, and this is the critique that Marx raises in the 18th Brumaire, how is this random, talentless fool who's absolutely have no worth to society and has no right to lead one of the, and in this case, the most revolutionary, greatest nation on earth, how is this guy running the country? And what Trump kind of exposes is there is something different about Trump violating civil rights as blatantly as he has, right? And we can have a conversation about how, and I'm very interested in this conversation, how has the Bonapartist state necessarily violated its own principles? And does that mean that there's a contradiction? Hegel, Marxism, all that. I'm very interested in that. I truly am. But what I don't understand is when kind of the monstrous version of that, in the sense that it's just so extreme and arbitrary in the way that he violates civil society. I feel like we're not always seeing that clearly. And like
I just don't agree that Trump is stupider than the people that came before him. And I do think that his rhetoric and his approach to politics isn't founded on the old ideology of meritocracy in the same way that he isn't making claims to being an expert with all the, I mean, he will point to data, but he isn't making the claims for his policies that way. He's making claims for his policies based on a wholly different kind of set of values, like someone who's trying to broker a business deal all the time, right? Like he's like talking about the leverage he has.
But what are the results of that? Because what we've seen is that he can't do anything with Russia. He can't do anything with tariffs. He just kind of like flip-flops, and then he's like, I'll do a tariff, and then I'll get a deal, and I can threaten Europe because they're spineless, and they will do what the US says to some degree. But like, is this really like intelligence? And if we look at the people around him that he surrounds himself with, I mean, these are clearly dumber individuals, right? Let's just be clear, right? I really value like what Chris is doing and what you're doing, and like cutting through like the mystification. I don't want to talk about how Hegseth is an alcoholic and he like beats women or whatever, and like rape. I don't care. What I care about is that the reason Trump picked Hegseth is because Trump called him up every now and then and said, "What's on your mind, Pete?" And Pete was like, "I really like World War II. I like thinking about war. I like thinking about the military." And Trump was like, "This is my military nerd friend." It's like everyone knows that guy who's just obsessed with military history and has all the World War II books. And Trump was basically like, "This is my war guy. I think he'd be a great Secretary of Defense." That's stupid. That's very I mean, he's got good friendships, I guess. That's good for him. I do believe that. But that is stupid, and Hegseth is stupid. And that reveals something of a degradation of the state, right? And we can say like there is a level of stupidity that is in the bureaucratized state also, where they just kind of like repeat things and they get stuck in these like institutional like regularities, and then they stop thinking, and then things are just kind of recycled. And there is a level of stupidity to that too. I admit that. But I just can't believe in any world. I don't like Harvard educated people. I'm sure there's a couple of them are okay. I don't like the Harvard class, but there can't be any world where the Harvard class is dumber or as dumb as the guy who picked Hegseth because Hegseth likes talking about World War II. That can't be the case.
I think there can be, and I think we're in it. And I really do. Well, I really think that we're in a world where they're just different kinds of flavors of stupidity, and and at the same time, they're also like, and this is, I'm going to sound maybe like I'm talking about out of both sides of my mouth or something, but at the same time, there's a certain kind of intelligence that is in both classes that are just different kinds of intelligence. I mean, look, I'm not gonna defend or attack Hegseth here or the way Trump selected him, but I do think that we should be careful about the way in which we claim Trump is as being uniquely stupid. A lot of things get covered up by that kind of claim, like because we have to first start with what does it mean to be smart? Like what kind of
Sure.
politics do we want to see developed? What is actually in the interests of, say, people like you and me who are not in political power? And are they different? Is our interest different from the interests of the heads of industry and the heads of state? You know, what is the actual political aim of either the Democratic Party or Trump? And I think there is something true about the fact. Okay, I do think that Joe Biden, Hillary Clinton, certainly Obama, Bill Clinton, all of those people are more cynical, and that means more intelligent in a way than Donald Trump. Donald Trump is politically naive. He doesn't
Sure.
think deeply about the structural limits of what can be done. He thinks about what he wants to do, and then he finds ways to accomplish what he wants to do that make sense to him without getting bogged down too much in high theory or anything like that. So, like, I want to. The example for me would be he wants to onshore industry, and he wants to bring back in manufacturing jobs to U.S. Workers. Not necessarily because he's so concerned about giving everyone a great living. It may be that a good portion of the new industrial jobs are going to be minimum wage jobs or just above, right? And maybe still a precarious kind of work in terms of getting healthcare and some of the things that we would be concerned about, that anyone who is a worker would be concerned about. But he wants to do that because he thinks it will strengthen the United States and be fairer in terms of how the United States is behaving with and being treated by other nations. So he's pursuing high tariffs in order to try to end strong arm tactics to try to rearrange the trade deals so that we can see productive growth in the U.S. economy. And at the moment, it looks like it's not entirely failing. It doesn't necessarily look like it's going to work out perfectly or maybe at all, but it has not failed yet, right? It is like, it's sort of puttering along. We haven't hit the side. We haven't gone off the side of a cliff. And there were so many people calling for the fact that, like, claiming that we are going over the side of the cliff, that now Trump looks like a genius to his fans.
Well,
I don't know what's going to happen in reality, but I just think we should be careful about claiming that he's stupid or smart. The reality is none of the attempts to paper over, manage, mitigate the contradictions within capitalist society are going to work in such a way that we're going to have a harmonious society. We're
right.
not going to get rid of of unemployment. We're not going to get rid of precarity. We're not going to get rid of uneven and unequal wages or development. We're not going to get rid of the international conflict and wars. They're just going to keep going as they have for the last 100 years. Or at least since the World War II, unless something more fundamental changes than what any of these parties can, produce.
That's that's possible. That's fine, but Trump isn't really producing a change. He's kind of like he's kind of I look at it as imagine there's a lake, okay? So the capitalist ruling class they're kind of like stuck in the lake, and they're surveying the lake, and they're like, guys, I don't know what to do. We're in the lake, like there's something wrong. We might drown, but I'm kind of stuck. I'm just surveying around. I'm just stuck looking back and forth. That's the capitalist class. Trump kind of like jumps in there. He sees like beyond the lake, and then he just starts like fluttering around and just like drowning. Like he just starts like just throwing a tantrum in the water and drowning. That's what Trump basically is. I mean, like we can it for example, like when you say like his tariffs attempt haven't failed, I mean, how I mean, what is the tariff attempt? I mean, he has his like his commerce secretary and his treasury secretary on the news all the time giving like different answers. They're like, well, we're going to reorder trade, and then they're like, well, we're going to bring back manufacturing, but actually not really. We're going to have like robots building everything, and actually we're not really going to have the same jobs, because obviously you're not going to go back to the industrial age. You're not going to actually turn back the clock. That's not going to happen. Like it seems very observably real that this is like not a coherent strategy. I mean, the reality is, like, I mean, you can even admit, like, I just don't know why we have to deny reality, because you can find Trump talking about foreign manufacturing in like the 80s. He was like, why is Japan manufacturing everything? Like, what's going on here? And it's like, okay, that's your cute little pet interest. That's fine. But that's not anything. Now, I do take seriously your claim that the ruling class is stuck in the lake, that they're not able to like truly reorganize society and break past the contradictions of capitalism in a new capitalist way. That might be the case, but just because they are in that situation and there's something going on with the ruling class, that doesn't mean like the child who's throwing a temper tantrum about Japan, like that doesn't mean we can't like rightfully decry that as stupid. And especially when Donald Trump isn't just being stupid and misunderstanding trade. I mean, he's affecting people's lives, right? I mean, there are people dying, there are people like having their civil rights infringed. I mean, one of his tantrums ended up in like millions of people in Africa dying from not having their needs met. And we can say, again, we can have this conversation about, you know, USAID. It was really just an imperial arm of the state to hold up American hegemony. It was that, but it also saved millions of lives. And what did Trump do? Did he dismantle American hegemony? Did he do anything with that? No, he likes American hegemony. He's just really dumb, and he wanted an excuse to save money. And we can kill a bunch of black people and make our pocketbooks look slightly in better shape. That's okay. That's an acceptable loss. But he won't actually cut anything that matters or would be a hard sell because he's weak. He's a coward, which puts him in the same situation as the working class, if you think about it. Or sorry, the ruling class, because he's actually too much of a coward to completely change like the welfare state. He won't actually do that because just like the ruling class, he knows that's not a possibility. He knows that would get him in trouble. So instead, his creative thinking is just letting a bunch of Africans die because he knows he can get away with it. So I feel like we have to.
Okay, all right. Let's talk about that claim about the Africans dying.
Let's do it. Yeah.
Because of the USAID. My understanding. Well, first of all, I'm just going to ask you, what is your evidence for the claim that millions of Africans have died because the USAID programs have been shut?
I said will die. I believe like most experts who are in the aid field have said this was incredibly important aid. They don't really have like a replacement for it, so there's some estimate of die. I mean, I think I've heard like hundreds of millions will die, but I'm not even making that claim. I'm just saying at least millions are going to die, possibly a lot more. Even if we don't take their highest estimate, I mean, there's all sorts of reasons why that could be wrong. Clearly, a lot of people are going to die who count on aid, because the reality is America holds a lot of these countries up on our backs. Like we really do. We really provide a lot of like basic needs because we can, and it makes us look good, and we are like we run the world basically. So that is just a fact. Yeah.
Well, couple of points. One is, while USAID has been restructured dramatically and it's smaller now, and it's being run by Marco Rubio last time I checked, and you know, the bureaucracy has been gutted. It has not ended. And every time, what I noticed when I was paying closer attention to the USAID question was that there would be claims about the impact on particularly, let's say, people who were receiving pharmaceuticals in third world nations or in Africa or where have you. They would be raised the response from the administration would be to do something to mitigate or roll back the cuts that would affect those particular people. I think, and without some substantial, we should probably just do another podcast on this alone, but without some really substantial investigation into those claims, I take them with a grain of salt. I'm not saying there won't be any negative effect on people in Africa because of the changes to USAID, but I do think the claim that it will be 1 million or more, it sounds to me hyperbolic. And here's the kind of the framework through which I view these kinds of claims, because they are coming directly from people within the state bureaucracy and the Democratic Party who are political actors trying to do damage to their opposition to Donald Trump. So I have to take it with a grain of salt unless I can look at the actual information and judge it for myself. And when I have done that, especially around that time, what I found was that the claims were specious. They were often clearly false. The example is the way in which they blamed Trump for airline crashes after he froze federal spending and claimed that that was the cause for a couple of different incidents, right? And when I investigated it, they would make a claim like, oh, well, air traffic control was understaffed at Ronald Reagan Airport, which led to this crash between a plane and a helicopter, a military helicopter and a commercial airliner. And if not for the cuts to federal spending, then the air traffic controllers would have been present and that would have been avoided. The reality was the air traffic control had been understaffed for the last 2 years. The reason for the understaffing had nothing to do with any particular new cuts, but was down to the way it was funded through fees on airline tickets, which was a matter of deregulation and allowing the airlines to pay less in fees. And nothing was being proposed to do anything about the structural causes for the decline in air traffic control. Right. The other thing that I found was that it was not at all clear that there had been an increase in airline crashes, only that there had been an increase in media interest and reporting on them, and there had been a particularly dramatic example. So we have to be just very careful about how we interpret the news. And people talk about being in information bubbles. Well, we are in information bubbles, but both of the bubbles that people are getting are mostly false, especially when there's being generated about current events that people don't, something that just happened that people can't possibly know what the true cause of is. So I just would say, I don't think that that USAID's the restructuring or even the dismantling of USAID, I do not believe that will be the consequence of that will be Africa will just suffer massive infections and diseases that go untreated. I believe there are other institutions and even within the U.S. federal government, other agencies within the U.S. federal government or ones that will be created, along with lots of other international agencies that will pick up the slack. And we're not talking about programs that really were serving millions anyway.
Well, yeah, if I could just comment on that, and then I agree with you that we shouldn't. I mean, neither of us have like conclusive 100%, and we don't want to get stuck on just that one case. But just to make like the last comment on that case, and actually this applies to everything, is really I think it's the Zizek like don't fall for the double blackmail situation, right? Because first of all, I think there are independent, genuine academic experts who know how these things work, and they are making the claim that this will impact a lot of people. But I do concede that a lot of the parroting of this point is partisan Democrats who want to make this point. That's fine. I can see that. But also on the other end, what you're using as your evidence is that the Trump administration says they're going to maybe bring it back and they reorganize the system. That is also, that's just Republican. That's just Republican talking points. I mean, they're both empty propaganda. But it does seem to me that when you cut through the propaganda, there are experts saying this is a severe funding decrease. I haven't seen any information that says they're bringing it back. They kind of gestured at it and they never actually did it. And so I think it's a very, but we have to be careful, because I agree with you in the airplane case. I've made this comment every time I see like an airplane thing on the news. I'm always like, I still do not know if they're just reporting on it more because it's like a thing on people's minds, or if there's any actual change in the amount of errors that is happening. I have no idea. So I myself have no idea, and I do not fall into saying obviously this is Trump's fault. I don't do that, because I agree we can't take the partisan talking points at their face value. But I feel like the response to that can't be, let's take the other side's talking points out of at face value. We have to do our best to actually find what the truth is. In the USAID case, I think that is that a lot of people are going to be affected. And there are other cases where there's different conclusions. In the airplane case, I have no idea what the conclusion is. But yeah, we can't, we really, really can't fall to the other side. I mean, we just can't do that, right? And obviously that is kind of getting to my issue with a lot of these issues, but yeah.
Well, I mean, I just think that, yeah, I mean, I'm not saying it will have no negative impact what happened to USAID. I'm just saying the idea that millions will die because of it is one of those speculative statements that I think we should be critical of, and not be, like you said, subject to the double blackmail on this topic. I certainly wouldn't want, the real problem with the USAID defunding and dismantling is that the Trump administration did not do that in order to get rid of the kind of clearly inhuman and violent and other, violations of just ordinary ethics that the USAID was perpetrating before. They did that because USAID was a stronghold of Democratic Party power, and what they wanted to do was capture it for the new Trump style Republican Party. Sure. So they are not planning on getting rid of what's called soft power and espionage through these kinds of supposedly humanitarian organizations. They simply are trying to change it into their instrument of power rather than the Democratic Party's instrument of power. So absolutely, that's what we should really focus on. And I just feel like the question of like, when you say, oh, well, USAID's defunding is going to kill millions of Africans, it is propaganda for the former soft power CIA front USAID. Rather, when you say, listen carefully to what the Republicans are saying, because what they're saying is they want that soft power, but for Trump and the Trump Republican Party, then you know that obviously whatever is happening is not going to be in the service of working class or independent civil society politics in Africa or here. So that's my position on USAID. Like, can't help but be glad to see it cut to pieces, but on the other hand, it does matter who's doing it and the reasons why, and I don't expect anything dramatic to change because of what Trump is doing.
Well, I mean, there's a Zizek point. I don't know how often he's made that. I'm not actually a huge Zizek guy at all, but it comes up. But in his recent book, he made this point that he's very obviously pro-Ukraine. Like, that's one of his things. He likes saying that he sided with Ukraine. And he points out that a lot of people get very frustrated with that. They're like, you're just falling into the ruling class's politics when you just support Ukraine. And what he says is, no, it's actually possible to support Ukraine and also be firm about kind of what's being smuggled into that position, right? So, for example, he says, by supporting Ukraine, are we supporting all the corrupt oligarchs in Ukraine that are going to take power after Ukraine is free? He says, absolutely, that's what we're doing. We're supporting Ukraine to become more corrupt and all of that. But what he says is the solution to that is not to stop supporting Ukraine against Russia. The solution to that is be very clear and fight also against what you're smuggling in. So he supports efforts that were made. I guess there was some conference where they were explicitly talking about, like, how can we prevent Ukraine from becoming a corrupt mess after the war? And he supports that because he says, listen, we have to be clear about what we're smuggling in, but also acknowledge the fact of the matter that is correct for that political partisan point. And that's, I guess, that's pretty close to what I'm arguing for. So I think we need to be clear that USAID did morally good things. It was a soft power apparatus. The Trump administration is cynically using it for Doge and also to co-opt it, as you said, for their own soft power and their own control of it. Like, we just have to be very clear about these things. We should admit when we're smuggling in, like, propaganda or fighting for a certain side, but that doesn't mean we have to stop making true points. If it seems like it's true that a lot of people are going to die, and then we should make that point. We should be honest about that. That doesn't mean we have to turn into like a CNN commentator who's like just droning. I really do dislike those people because they are doing propaganda, but I do feel like there has to be a path for doing both, having a more consistent principle position. Yeah.
Look, I'm hearing Chris Catrone in my head right now as we're talking, because warning me about how to respond to the question of Ukraine. My instinct with Ukraine is to say, look, obviously the better option for Ukraine and Ukrainians would be for there to be some sort of peaceful negotiation and into the war. And the reason why I say that is because if Ukraine were to start to really win and take back territories and push Russia out, the chance of an escalation into nuclear conflict, maybe most likely with tactical nuclear weapons, would be high, very high. Sure. And the actual aim of the U.S. Blob, the DC consensus, those who are pro-Ukraine, is not for Ukraine to decisively win at this point, but rather for Russia to be systematically and perpetually weakened by being bogged down in the Ukrainian conflict. So what that means is the people who are ultimately going to pay the price for that conflict are going to be Ukrainians. And, and what we're looking at is a perpetual war perpetual bloodshed, and obviously all the corruption in government and the repression that comes along with being in a state where you're in a perpetual war. So the chances for actual independent political organizing in Ukraine right now are less than zero, to use a Zizekian phrase. And so, but that's my first instinct. But then there's Catrone in the back of my head saying, yeah, Doug, the socialists are in no position to do anything about what's happening in Ukraine. So, and knowing the truth about what's happening in Ukraine shouldn't be conflated with knowing what the right policy is, or what the right terms of a peace negotiation would be, or trying to stand in for the capitalist political classes right now. We can't. We don't. So my actual intelligent response to Ukraine is to just point out how it is a consequence of the impasse of capitalist politics, and how any kind of solution that you try to create in this context will have massive unintended consequences and unintended results that will undermine inevitably any effort for independent political organizing. But there are some examples that I'm more comfortable with than others. Ukraine is one where, I have my knee-jerk kind of rad lib analysis, which I just gave, which is a sort of anti-imperialist gray zone aligned analysis, which I think there's some truth to, but I wouldn't want to claim that I have a set of policies that would be better than what Trump is trying to do in Ukraine, or what Biden was trying to do in Ukraine, or even what Putin was trying to do in Ukraine, or what Zelensky. I think that there are for like all of these political classes are in opposition, and what they've worked out is a deal that works for everyone except for the people of Ukraine, which is we'll just have this perpetual war. Zelensky gets to be in power for a lot longer. Putin gets to have more draconian control over his own population. I mean, it's always precarious. We get to do something about Russia and undermine Russia. And it's, it's like the same thing in Gaza, but I won't go on and on about it. But yeah, I just think we are looking at a situation where we want to be able to intervene, and the really hard truth is we can't at the moment. We cannot intervene at the moment, and we have to try to build a political power for socialism where there could be some way to have a real impact and influence there.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a Marx, and there's a few writings by Marx that I think kind of make this point that we can hold multiple thoughts in our head at the same time. So that might seem to be contrary or contradictory. So Marx, when writing about India, he would make different points. So one point he would make is that in the historical process, Britain is bringing modernization and all of the historical contingencies that capitalist contradictory state will bring to India. And in some sense, that's just a necessary thing. It's one of those things that we might have positive feelings towards because they're going to be brought into the modern world, and they're going to get rid of some of their older practices that were, that we don't like. But at the same time, it's going to bring all the tragedy of modern society. But at the end of the day, it's really just a necessity. At the same time, when the revolts were happening, and there were all these reports in the British press of how the Indians were doing all these horrible, things to the British, he said, listen, the British he took kind of a moralizing point where he said, the British have done all sorts of horrible tragedies in a different fashion than the, barbarous Indians are doing. But ultimately, this is sort of a reaction that we have to like understand and sympathize with to some extent, because there is an injustice that the British committed, and we have to, and there is a sense in which we can have a moralistic position on that, right? So I think there's a way for us to acknowledge, as you did, that there's a broader historical context of the capitalist states, and they're fighting over territory, and these border states, and these corrupt plagued states that are like ping-ponging between Russia's interest and the West's interests, and like we can have a kind of a conceptual structural conversation about that, while also saying, the Ukrainians, I mean, they're fighting for their sovereignty, this like imperial state, they're trying to genocide and mass murder and bomb all the Ukrainians alive. And we can say, like, I support the Ukrainian people in their fight against the Russian imperial state, but I also acknowledge the structural, conceptual place that we're in, why this is happening in the first place. And then that might bring you to, especially if you are a socialist, to say, how do we change that structure, right? You can't just sit here doomsaying and saying, wow, this is horrible, this is messed up that this happens. You have to have a solution, and if that is socialist organizing and creating political power that create a society, that's totally fine. But you can do both, I guess.
I just in the case of Ukraine, I don't know that those who are in Ukraine who are continuing to fight the Russian invasion at this point, it's very difficult to say what the people of Ukraine would see as being in their own interest, because in reality, there is no way for the people of Ukraine to organize and build a societal interest because of the amount of both bombardment from Russia and internal oppression. You have all the dissident political parties are illegal. It just is not clear to me that I don't see who represents the interest of Ukraine right now.
But I feel like we're smuggling certain things in there. So dissident parties are not outlawed in Ukraine. The main opposition is there, and they criticize Zelensky. And then at certain times they'll say we support Zelensky against Russia and against Trump and all that. But also we really disagree with Zelensky and we'd like to get him out of office, because the main opposition still exists. I mean, I just don't think it's true we can say that they're outlawed.
I mean, sure, if you I would say when you outlaw the Socialist Party and when you start outlawing political parties, dissident politics has been oppressed. When the state
Well,
can say this kind of opposition is acceptable, this kind of opposition is not. When the people cannot organize politically on their own, but the state regulates politics on that level, then you don't really have room for dissonant politics. If it were suddenly true that the Green Party was outlawed in the United States, but no, still the Democrats are allowed. Trump's allowing the Democrats to continue. Would anyone say, "Oh, well, the dissonant parties aren't being made illegal"? I think they would say that they're being made illegal.
maybe, but again, it's what we're smuggling in, right? So I feel like what we're not talking about what we're smuggling in when we talk about dissident parties is the fact that Ukraine is in a war and these parties are pro-Russia explicitly, right? And so if Trump banned the Green Party and he had intelligence that the Green Party was directly working with Hamas, we can critique the capitalist structure that necessitates the banning and the oppression of civil liberties. That's fine, but also that party, if it was just supporting Hamas blatantly, like that's a different situation objectively than if they were just banning any dissidents, right? I mean, there's like what are we really talking about, right? And in the case of all the political parties that are banned in Ukraine, there is a hampering of civil liberties that we should care about, but we should also be honest. We're talking about a war. We're talking about people getting banned because they are oppositional to the state. And when you're in a war, you don't usually allow political parties to say the other side should win. That's just kind of how that works, right? And we
I
can
mean, if
critique that
you're in Crimea and Putin is saying no pro-Ukrainian political parties are going to be allowed to organize in Crimea, I think most people would say Putin is banning dissident political parties.
I wouldn't care about that at all. I mean, to me, that's a completely meaningless fact. Like, again, that's part of the war. That's the war. I want to talk about the war. What is the structure of the war? What's happening? I don't care that Putin's banning those opposition parties. I
But if
truly
we wanted to know what the people who are, the nation of Crimea really wanted, what do the people of Crimea want? We can't know that under conditions where the will of society is being controlled by the state. That's all I'm saying.
But the reason it's being controlled is because Putin decided to invade another country, right? Like that's like I think it's a tragedy that we can't know what civil society wants, but the reason for that is because of because Putin is an imperialist, like conqueror, expander. Like that's why. Like that's the reason why, right?
Well, or it's because the imperialist West was pushing right up against his border, and
this is the smuggling in. This is smuggling in.
No. I mean, look, I think both arguments are valid from the perspective of capitalist national interests, and if you want to side with some nationalist capitalist political party over another, I guess that's fine, but I just don't. And so I just don't. I feel as though luckily in the United States right now, we are not, political parties have not been made illegal. We have the ability here to organize independently and for society and for working class people. That is not open to the people of Ukraine or the people of Russia for whatever reasons, without just trying to figure out who's at fault.
Can I just make one point about that? Mm-hmm. Imagine if the United States decided to invade Mexico and there were political parties like the Green Party that were just outright pro-Mexico. And then we started banning civil society, we started suppressing freedom of speech because we're actually in a war. Would you not criticize the very impulse and the very decision to invade Mexico? Would you not be concerned with the fact that the state made this decision? And you can criticize the broader structure, but you would have a clear position of like, we're in this situation because they invaded Mexico, and we're in this situation because that necessitates a banning of political opposition, and that's a problem because that makes it difficult to organize the working class, just organize in general, to have rights in and of themselves. That's difficult. I mean, that would be a problem. We'd have a problem with that, right? Like we wouldn't just be like, like I don't think we would. I don't think Marx or any of these thinkers would be like, well, we just unlucky. That's just what happens. Is the countries invade? Like I think we do have to like analyze that and criticize that in that
Sure,
situation.
and okay, right. And I'm just saying, right now in Ukraine, the fact that Ukraine so-called sovereignty was always basically a matter of choosing which larger powers were going to be running its internal politics for it, um, makes the question of Ukrainian sovereignty kind of a non-starter for me in this moment. And if the United States invaded Mexico, I would be opposed to the U.S. invasion of Mexico. And if I was in Russia, I would certainly be opposed to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And I'm not in any way trying to condone the Russian
Sure.
invasion of Ukraine. I'm just saying from the perspective of someone in the United States, we can hope for a peaceful resolution to the conflict. We should avoid trying to perpetuate the conflict, because the longer the occupying forces are there, the longer the armed conflict goes on, the more suppressed both Russian civil society and Ukrainian civil society will be. And so I think it would be in the interest of the working class overall for there to be some kind of peaceful resolution there.
Right.
And but that's as far as I want to go. And I really don't think that I am in a position to, I mean, I'm not being sent to try to negotiate the peace process, but I would like to see a peace process, because I do think it would be good for the bombings to stop and for the imposition of, I don't think it's going to change much in Russia if it ended, but it might change things in Ukraine if the war ended. It might open up a possibility for Ukrainian independent political movements to arise again after the war. So that's what I would like to see.
Yeah, I guess the last thing I would say about that is I think when we take that position, we can think and maybe want and intend to be taking a position kind of against the whole thing, kind of a clear-eyed like line in the sand. But again, what are we smuggling in? Because a lot of times when you make those points, you're basically just making the Russian argument. It basically ends up turning into, we should negotiate and settle so that Russia can have their part of the territory, and then Russia can invade again if they want. I mean, that's like the practical like consequences of what you're describing. So that's why I think we have to be clear about, what is coming in when we say, you can say that you're outside of it. You can say you don't want to side with either capitalist party and you really want to critique the structure. But then when you start saying things like, I think we need to have peace soon, that ends up in capitalist politics becoming Russia wins.
How would you feel about the U.S. and NATO together, along with maybe even Chinese forces or something like that, invading Russia?
I would not. I mean, I probably would not support that. That's not the ideal.
Because the thing is, in order to really eradicate the threat of Russian aggression in the future, you're going to have to dismantle the Russian state as it is, get it to disarm, and have some other governing authority more aligned with the West in charge. Otherwise, you're going to continue to have the threat of Russian aggression. Whether or not Russia gets to hold on to Crimea and the other parts of the Donbass that it's already taken.
Sure.
So, if the goal is regime change in Russia, the question becomes, for those who are for that, what is the limit on the amount of power that you'd want to see exercised by those powers that actually could conceivably change the situation? I mean, Ukraine's not going on its own in this way, not going to be able to create regime change in Russia. And so maybe the hope is that there will be from below a kind of, color revolution in Russia, or some sort of, but I doubt that's going to be the consequence of the continuation of the fighting in Ukraine.
It doesn't have to be regime change, right? It just, here's the problem, right? So if there was a truly peaceful, neither side is happy, just a line in the sand, You can't invade. If there was something like that, I think we'd have to say, okay, that's like the best it's going to get in this situation, right? But what Trump is doing and what you're kind of suggesting is kind of, well, he hasn't done it because Trump doesn't know what he wants and he's like going back and forth, whatever. But what if you really just say let's make a deal as soon as possible, then you're just letting Russia win, and you're letting Russia basically violate whatever they want, do whatever they want. You're basically siding with them, really, because that's a really good situation for Russia. They get to hold on to a lot of territory. They get to consolidate their society. They get to reconsolidate their military, whatever, and then they can invade in the future and cause more suffering. That's a problem for anyone who cares about human life, international rules within the capitalists like society, that scheme. So yeah, I think we have to be really clear about, again, like what we're, unknowingly including in that. And if you don't want to do that, I agree with you that if my position was we need a regime change, we need to get rid of Putin as soon as possible, then I would have to account for the escalation that would come with that and all those problems. But I also think you have to account for what's going to happen if you just get peace as soon as possible. What does that mean for the world, for society, for civil society in Russia, for civil society in Ukraine? Also, if you have peace, Ukraine's going to have a really hard time having anything like that, having any peaceful.
I mean, Dylan, it sounds like to me like what you're advocating for is what might happen. Because if Trump is as incompetent as you say, then what you're advocating for might be the natural consequences of Trump's failure, which is just the long extension of continued conflict in Ukraine, which is a nice stasis. It's neither regime change in Russia, nor is it any kind of victory for Russia. It's just a kind of maintenance of this status quo crisis where Russia is being continually punished, and we can be more assured that they won't be able to be aggressive in any other way.
No, I do want a settlement. I do actually want an intelligent leaders to get a settlement. I do want settlement. I don't want permanent war. No, I don't think that's accurate. I don't. I guess I would say.
So we both want a settlement, and the question
Yeah.
now becomes this sort of debate about what would be what NATO and the U.S. and Ukraine should be willing to concede or compromise on in such a settlement. And I frankly don't want to have that conversation with you right now, because I would have to spend a little bit of time at least thinking about it, based on the facts on the ground now, to really have that conversation. But the reality is, you and I both would like to see a settlement, a peaceful resolution to the war in Ukraine. And the only difference between us is maybe the rhetoric we use around that. Or
I don't think that's a correct characterization of our difference. But
what's the difference then?
I think the difference is that I want a more honest accounting for the interests of both sides and what would happen given different kinds of peace settlements. Whereas I think you're more okay with a peace settlement on principle for it being a peace settlement, and that might result in a less honest accounting for the world that would be created in the aftermath of that, roughly.
Well, look, I think we're setting up the second half of this conversation really well right here, because the question now shifted from what do we want to see happen in Ukraine to how much of a role should the public, people like you and I, have in these kinds of decisions, and what obligations does the state have towards the public in terms of informing them,
Mm-hmm.
how much democratic control should be exerted.
Right.
And I tend to be with you when I think that absolutely we should be getting real information about what's happening there, be able to have actual debates about the situation in Ukraine, and
Mm-hmm.
the way, if you're in the United States, the way U.S. money is being spent.
Right.
We should break from the propaganda of the two parties,
Mm-hmm.
and not be so led by the framing that the both parties put forward. I am trying to introduce a different kind of framing where I'm trying to push forward this idea that what's most important is the freedom of the people in Ukraine and the freedom of the people in Russia to be able to organize independently politically to address a larger problem than just this war. But there's this other question. It's like, how do we even approach trying to understand the world situation, and what kind of facts count, and how do we analyze the news and that kind of thing? And that's one of the things that Sublation is trying to work on, is like say, okay, we need an independent politics. That means we need an independent kind of journalism and theorizing, and one where we can be clear about how we're making sense of the world and on what basis. And it's what we're kind of always arguing about, trying to work through, develop through Sublation. And it's a tough fight, actually, to do that. So,
sure.
But why don't we end this part of the conversation here, and then you can come after me with the ways in which I've become completely deluded about Twitter files and JFK and Russiagate and
absolutely
COVID in the second half.
All right. Sounds good.
All right. I'll stop it here then. Oh, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to run the outro. Let's see, where is that? Here we go. I'm going to run this outro, which will then make this easy for me to post. If you enjoyed this conversation, please do consider supporting us on Patreon. Our patrons help to make sure that Sublation Media can continue to provide interviews, videos, books, and articles that are critical of the left from the left. If you are tired of remaining stuck within bourgeois ideologies and politics, help us sublate them both.